The five teenage vandals had turned the peaceful sanctuary of St. Michael's Church into their personal playground of destruction. Spray paint-covered century-old walls, stained glass windows lay shattered on the floor, and holy books were scattered like confetti. Everyone had fled when the chaos began. Everyone except for the quiet woman in the cleaning uniform who stood between them and the altar. Her refusal to run was a challenge they couldn't ignore. They saw a defenseless church janitor, an easy victim to complete their rampage. They had no idea they were about to face someone who had carried the word of God into the deadliest battlefields on earth. Christina Rodriguez, 35 years old, knelt quietly beside the main altar of St. Michael's Church, her weathered hands carefully polishing the bronze cross that had watched over this congregation for over a century. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her gentle brown eyes held a serenity that seemed to calm the very air around her. She wore a simple gray cleaning uniform and comfortable shoes, the kind that could handle long hours of walking on stone floors. Her movements were deliberate and reverent, treating each sacred object as if it contained the divine itself. Hidden beneath her uniform, faded scars told stories of explosions and gunfire, while a small worn prayer book in her pocket contained verses that had been her shield in the world's most dangerous places. The cross and sword insignia of the Army Chaplain Corps, tattooed over her heart, marked her as one of the few who had brought faith to soldiers facing their darkest hours. St. Michael's was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where she could serve God in peace after serving Him in war. But today, that sacred peace was about to be shattered. For more powerful videos about our military heroes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. The sound of shattering stained glass echoed through St. Michael's Church as five teenage vandals cornered Christina in the sanctuary. Just a pathetic cleaning lady, their leader sneered, grabbing her uniform and ripping it open to humiliate her. But what spilled out wasn't weakness. Tattooed across her chest was the distinctive cross and sword of the Army Chaplain Corps, surrounded by scars that told a story of bringing faith to the world's most dangerous battlefields. Before we begin this incredible story, let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed someone destroying something sacred to you? Have you ever felt called to protect something holy, even when you were outnumbered and afraid? If this has happened to you, share your story in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. The afternoon sun streamed through the magnificent stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, casting rainbows of colored light across the oak pews and marble floor. The sanctuary was empty except for Christina Rodriguez, who moved through her daily routine with the reverence of someone who understood that she wasn't just cleaning a building, she was maintaining a holy place. At 3:47 p.m., the massive wooden doors burst open with a violence that made Christina's heart skip. Five teenagers stormed in, their faces covered with bandanas, their hands carrying spray paint cans and baseball bats. They ranged in age from 15 to 17, dressed in black hoodies and ripped jeans, their eyes filled with the kind of rage that comes from broken homes and forgotten dreams. Their leader, a tall, wiry boy named Derek, who thought destruction was the same as power, surveyed the sanctuary with cruel satisfaction. "Perfect," he said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "No one here but the cleaning lady." Christina stood slowly from where she'd been polishing the altar rail, her brown eyes taking in the scene with the calm assessment of someone who had faced far worse situations. "Boys," she said gently, "this is God's house. Whatever anger you're carrying, this isn't the place to release it." Derek laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to violate the sacred space. "God's house? Where was God when my dad walked out? Where was God when they foreclosed on our house?" He gestured to his crew. "Spread out, tag everything, break everything." The vandalism began with a fury that shocked even Christina, who had seen human destruction in its most organized form. Windows exploded under baseball bats. Spray paint hissed across walls that had stood for over a century. Prayer books were torn and scattered. The altar cloth, hand-embroidered by generations of churchwomen, was ripped from its place and trampled underfoot. "Stop," Christina called out, stepping forward. "Please, I'm begging you. These things are irreplaceable. This church has brought comfort to thousands of people for over 100 years. Then maybe it's time for some change," Derek snarled, raising his bat toward the wooden crucifix that hung behind the altar. That's when Christina moved, not with violence, but with the kind of authority that comes from years of commanding respect in impossible situations. "Son," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made Derek pause mid-swing, "you don't want to do that." Chapter 2, Faith Under Fire, Under Fire. Derek turned to face her, his eyes blazing with adolescent rage and pain. "What are you going to do about it, lady? Call the cops? They'll get here too late to save your precious church. Christina stood her ground, her cleaning uniform somehow seeming less like the clothes of a janitor and more like the vestments of someone who had faced darkness before. I'm not going to call anyone. I'm asking you person to person to reconsider what you're doing here. Person to person? Derek's voice cracked with bitter laughter. You think we're equals? You're a cleaning lady in a dead building full of dead promises? We're the future. His crew spread out around the sanctuary, continuing their destruction with renewed vigor. Marcus, a stocky 15-year-old with anger issues, began smashing the ornate light fixtures with methodical precision. Twin brothers Jake and Josh worked together to overturn the heavy wooden pews, their combined strength making terrible crashing sounds as century-old furniture splintered against the stone floor. The fifth member, a girl named Raven with purple hair and multiple piercings, focused her rage on the religious artwork, tearing down paintings of saints and biblical scenes, shredding them with a knife she'd pulled from her boot. This is what your God gets, Derek called out to Christina, gesturing at the chaos around them. This is what happens to things that don't fight back. Christina watched the destruction with the same steady gaze she'd once used to watch mortar rounds fall around field hospitals. Fighting back isn't always about violence, son. Sometimes the strongest response is standing firm in what you believe. Believe? Derek's voice rose to a shout. What kind of God lets kids get beaten by their stepdads? What kind of God lets families lose everything they own? Your God is either weak or cruel, and either way, he doesn't deserve this fancy house. Christina felt something shift inside her chest. The same feeling she'd experienced in Afghanistan when soldiers would question their faith after watching their friends die. God doesn't promise us a life without pain, she said quietly, but he promises we don't have to face that pain alone. Spare me the sermon, Derek snarled. You don't know anything about pain. That's when he made his fatal mistake. In his rage and adolescent need to dominate, he grabbed Christina by the front of her cleaning uniform and yanked her toward him. Maybe we should add the cleaning lady to our list of things to destroy, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. The fabric of her gray uniform strained under his grip, then tore with a sound like thunder. Buttons scattered across the marble floor, and as the shirt fell open, the entire sanctuary seemed to hold its breath. Because tattooed over Christina's heart in perfect detail was the cross and sword insignia of the United States Army Chaplain Corps. The sacred symbol was surrounded by scars, burn marks from IED explosions, a long surgical scar from shrapnel removal, and the telltale marks of someone who had carried wounded soldiers while under enemy fire. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The silence that followed was complete and profound, the kind of silence that fills a church during the most sacred moments of worship. Derek's grip went slack, his eyes widening as he took in the full picture. The other Vandals stopped their destruction mid-motion, drawn by something in the atmosphere that demanded attention. Hanging from a simple chain around Christina's neck was something that made even these hardened teenagers step back in recognition. It was the Combat Action Badge, awarded only to soldiers who had engaged in combat operations. Below it hung ribbons that spoke of service in the world's most dangerous places: Afghanistan, Iraq, places where faith wasn't just a comfort but a necessity for survival. Christina didn't try to cover herself or hide the evidence of her service. Instead, she stood straighter, and something in her bearing changed. The gentle church janitor was still there, but now they could see the chaplain underneath, the officer who had brought comfort to dying soldiers, who had performed last rites under machine gun fire, who had carried wounded men to safety while reciting prayers that kept both her and them alive. My name is Captain Christina Rodriguez, she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in the most chaotic situations imaginable. United States Army Chaplain Corps, retired. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, where I ministered to soldiers who were facing the same anger and pain I see in your eyes. Derek's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The bat in his hands suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Christina continued, her voice gentle but unshakable. I've held dying 18-year-olds who cried for their mothers. I've performed funeral services in the middle of firefights. I've seen what real destruction looks like, and I've seen what faith can do in the darkest moments of human experience. Marcus dropped his spray paint can, the metallic clatter echoing off the stone walls. You were in the army? I was, Christina said simply. And do you know what I learned in all those years of war? That destroying things doesn't heal pain. It just spreads it. But building something, protecting something, caring for something, that's where healing begins. The twins, Jake and Josh, looked around at the destruction they'd caused with new eyes. The sanctuary that had seemed like a target for their rage now looked like a wounded place, and they were the ones who had wounded it. Chapter 4, Divine Intervention. As if summoned by the gravity of the moment, the church's front doors opened again, but this time, instead of destructive teenagers, three figures entered with quiet dignity. Father Miguel Santos, the church's priest, walked in flanked by two men in military dress uniforms. Major Williams, a chaplain from the nearby army base, had been called by someone who had seen the Vandals entering the church. Beside him walked Sergeant First Class Peterson, a military policeman who had served under Christina's guidance in Afghanistan, and would never forget the woman who had saved his spiritual life when IEDs couldn't touch his physical one. Father Santos surveyed the damage with sadness but no anger, his eyes finally settling on the scene at the altar where Christina stood with her service record literally exposed to the 5 teenagers who had tried to destroy his church. "Captain Rodriguez," Major Williams said, his voice carrying across the sanctuary with military precision and deep respect. "It's an honor to see you again, ma'am." Christina nodded to him, still holding the torn edges of her uniform. "Major Williams, Sergeant Peterson, I'm sorry you had to see the church like this." "Ma'am," Sergeant Peterson stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "The church looks exactly like it should, protected by someone who understands what sacred really means." The 5 vandals looked between the military personnel and Christina, beginning to understand that they hadn't just attacked a building or intimidated a cleaning lady. They had desecrated a place of worship in front of someone who had carried that same faith through literal valleys of death. Chapter 5, Sacred Testimony. Major Williams addressed the teenagers directly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen Christina's work firsthand. "Do you know what this woman did in Afghanistan? She didn't just read Bible verses to homesick soldiers. She ran into firefights to reach wounded men. She performed last rites while bullets were flying over her head. She carried soldiers twice her size to safety when medics couldn't get through enemy fire." Derek tried to find his voice, but shame had taken it away. "The cross and sword you see tattooed on her chest," Sergeant Peterson continued, "isn't just military insignia. It's a promise to bring God's love to people who think they're beyond saving. And she kept that promise in places where keeping it could get you killed." Christina finally spoke, her voice gentle but strong. "I didn't tell you this to intimidate you or to make you feel ashamed. I told you because I recognize the pain in your actions. I've seen soldiers do the same things, lash out at everything around them because they're hurting inside." She gestured to the damaged sanctuary. "This building, these symbols, this space, they're not about a God who abandons people or lets bad things happen without caring. They're about a God who walks with people through their darkest moments. I know because I've been in those dark places and I've never walked alone." Raven, the girl with purple hair, was crying now. "We didn't know," she whispered. We thought God didn't care about people like us." "People like us are exactly who God cares about most," Christina replied. "The broken, the angry, the ones who think they're beyond redemption, that's who Jesus spent his time with." Chapter 6, Redemption and Restoration. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Derek, the leader who had torn Christina's shirt and tried to destroy everything sacred in the sanctuary, dropped to his knees beside the scattered prayer books. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "We're all sorry. We didn't understand what this place meant, what service means." The other 4 teenagers joined him, not in some dramatic Hollywood moment, but in the quiet, real recognition that they had attacked something and someone who deserved protection, not destruction. Father Santos stepped forward, his voice warm with forgiveness. "This church has always been about second chances, about people finding their way back to grace." Over the following weeks, something miraculous happened. The 5 vandals returned to St. Michael's every day after school, not to destroy, but to rebuild. Derek proved surprisingly skilled at woodworking, helping to repair the damaged pews. Marcus discovered he had an artist's eye, working to restore the paintings Raven had torn. The twins learned the careful art of stained glass repair from the craftsman Father Santos hired. And Raven, the girl with purple hair who had seemed the most lost, found her calling helping Christina with the daily care of the sanctuary. She learned that maintaining a sacred space wasn't just about cleaning, it was about creating an environment where broken people could find healing. Christina never tried to hide her military service after that day. The torn uniform had revealed more than just her tattoos and medals. It had revealed the truth about who she really was. Not just a janitor, not just a veteran, but someone who had answered God's call to serve others in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Chapter 7, A New Mission. 6 months after the vandalism, St. Michael's Church looked better than it had in decades, but more importantly, it had become something new, a place where military veterans gathered every Thursday evening for a support group led by Christina, where teenagers from difficult backgrounds found mentorship and purpose, where the sacred and the everyday intersected in ways that healed both. Derek, now 17 and preparing for college, often stayed after youth group meetings to help Christina lock up the church. "Captain," he said one evening, "I've been thinking about enlisting, maybe becoming a chaplain myself." Christina smiled, the same gentle expression she'd worn while comforting dying soldiers and rebellious teenagers alike. The Army could use more people who understand that strength isn't about what you can destroy, but what you're willing to protect. As they walked through the sanctuary together, past the restored windows and repaired pews, past the altar where Christina had once stood alone against 5 angry kids, Derek asked the question that had been haunting him for months. "Why didn't you fight back? You could have stopped us. Someone with your training." Christina paused beside the bronze cross she polished every day, the same one Derek had threatened with his baseball bat. "Because fighting back would have made me just another person who hurt you. And you'd already been hurt enough." She touched the cross gently, the way she'd once touched the dog tags of soldiers who wouldn't be coming home. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand in the gap. Stand between destruction and what needs protecting. Stand between people and their worst impulses. Stand between the world and the sacred. "Even when you're scared?" Derek asked. "Especially when you're scared," Christina replied. "Faith isn't about not being afraid. Faith is about doing the right thing even when you are afraid." As they finished locking up and walked out into the evening air, neither of them spoke about the obvious truth, that Christina had found her new mission field right here in this peaceful church, bringing the same comfort to broken civilians that she'd once brought to broken soldiers. The Army Chaplain Corps had trained her to minister in war zones. Life had taught her that sometimes the battlefield is a sanctuary, and sometimes the enemy is the pain people carry in their own hearts. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't won by fighting back. It's won by standing firm, showing grace under fire, and proving that some things are too sacred to abandon, no matter how much force is arrayed against them. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for something sacred when you were outnumbered or afraid? Have you ever discovered that someone you underestimated was actually extraordinary? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who needs the courage to protect what they hold dear. And if this story reminded you that heroes serve in every walk of life, that faith can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest strength is shown through mercy, hit that subscribe button, because everyone deserves to have their story told, and everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are beneath the surface.